Hello, Sunim. I wasn't expecting to ask you a question, so I need to remember what I submitted. But I think the point of the question is I wanted to revisit the topic of nature with you because last time I tried, but it sounded like I wanted to come back because I don't think my question was fully answered. Um, I think Sunim really, refers to nature as sort of the golden standard when it comes to deciding what we should do. And I think, to my knowledge, the inspiration is drawn from the precepts. When Sunim, describes, for example, the story of like the squirrel, when you compare us to squirrels and say that the squirrels live lighter lives, happier lives than we do, I think some people, especially those in the younger ones and the people on the West, they tend to disagree with that analogy because especially for example my wife, she goes like, how do we know if squirrels actually live happier lives? What if they're always paranoid that something's going to just swoop down from above and just like eat them? So when people disagree with this view of nature, how should we approach them when it comes to explaining the precepts and this like framework to decide what's good and what's bad?
네, 우리들의 정신작용도 자연의 일부입니다.
Our mental functioning is part of nature.
그러나 우리는 정신작용과 나머지를 분리해서 인위적이다, 자연적이다 이렇게 표현합니다.
But we tend to separate our mental faculties out from nature and define ourselves differently.
크게 이 존재를 나누면 한 세 가지 정도 나눌 수 있을 것 같습니다. 제가 생각할 때는.
But, in my opinion, if we were to classify or divide the nature into three large classification, I think we can divide into three large groups.
첫째, 물질적인 거고요.
One, material.
두 번째는 생명작용이고요.
Second, life.
세 번째는 정신작용입니다.
Third, mental functioning.
어떤 생명작용도 물질작용의 바탕 위에 있습니다.
Any mental functioning rests upon the material conditions.
그러나 생명작용은 물질작용과는 또 다른 성격도 갖고 있습니다.
But life functions have a slightly different characteristic than just merely inorganic material.
이러한 생명작용 바탕 위에 정신작용이 있습니다.
And upon the life functioning rests our mental functioning.
생명작용을 바탕하지 않는 정신작용이라는 것은 존재하지 않습니다.
So there is no mental functioning without underlying life.
그러나 정신작용은 생명작용과 또 다른 하나의 추가되는 작용이 있다는 겁니다.
However, mental functioning also evinces a characteristic that's apart from just merely life functioning.
우리가 자연적이다, 자연이다 할 때는 이 정신작용을 중심으로 해서 이 물질작용이나 생명작용을 우리가 자연이다 이렇게 표현합니다.
So when we describe something as natural, as part of nature, we define it based on their mental functioning.
이런 정신작용을 갖고 있기 때문에 인간은 다른 생명들보다 좋은 점도 있고 나쁜 점도 있다는 거예요.
And because we have such mental functioning, that causes there are pros and cons to that for human beings compared to other animals or other life forms.
물론 그것도 좋다 나쁘다 하는 것도 우리들의 생각입니다.
And even the pros and cons are actually our own value judgments.
근데 우리가 보편적으로 그냥 생각했을 때 이 정신작용이 고도로 발달한 사람은 다른 정신작용이 덜 발달한 다른 생물에 비해서 괴로움이 크다는 거예요.
But generally speaking, we observe that human beings with high functioning mental functions tend to suffer more compared to other animals with lower mental functions.
그렇기 때문에 그 괴로움이 큰 것은 이런 물질이나 생명 작용 때문에 오는 게 아니라 정신 작용 때문에 오는 거라는 거죠.
So basically, that leads us to think that our sense of suffering really comes from our mental functioning, not just material or life.
뭐 다람쥐가 즐겁게 산다는 뜻은 아닙니다.
That does not mean I'm not saying that squirrels lead enjoyable lives.
그러나 사람만큼 괴롭지 않다는 거예요.
But what I'm saying is that squirrels don't seem to suffer as much as we do.
그렇기 때문에 우리가 정신작용의 일부를 잘 조절하면 최소한도 다람쥐만큼은 살 수가 있다는 거예요.
So what I'm saying, if we can control and modulate, our mental functioning, then we can at least live a life that's as free of suffering as a squirrel.
동물들은 위기에 처할 때는 긴장하고 괴롭습니다.
Animals, for example, when they feel a threat coming, then they tense up and they stress.
그러나 그 위기가 없어지면 괴로움이 스트레스가 사라집니다.
But once the threat disappears, they don't continue feeling the same sense of stress.
그런데 사람은 위기가 사라져도 그 스트레스가 사라지지 않는다는 거예요.
But for a human being, the threat might not be there, but our stress remains.
그것이 과거를 기억하면서 계속 괴로워하는 거예요.
So regardless of the imminence of the threats, we recall back into the past and we continue to suffer because of it.
괴로워하고 미워하고 원망하고 이런 것은 다 다른 동물에게는 크게 없는 겁니다.
Suffering, hating, these things, they don't really exist in other animals as much as they do in ours.
또 우리는 미래를 생각하면서 근심하고 걱정하고 초조하고 불안하고 아직 일어나지도 않는데 이런 경우도 많습니다.
Then again, we think about the future, something that has not even happened, and we feel anxious and nervous.
이건 또 역시 다른 동물들에게도 거의 없습니다.
And these don't exist in other animals either.
그러니까 이런 문제는 우리가 인생이 괴로울 수밖에 없는 것이 아니라 이건 조금만 연구하면 그런 괴로움에서 벗어날 수 있다는 거예요.
So all that to say is that, we're not destined to suffer. Is that if we really explore our cognition a little, it is possible to modulate so that we do not suffer in such a way.
그런데 이것을 좀 더 연구하면 위기에 처했을 때도 괴롭지 않고 불안하지 않을 수가 있다는.
But if you think deeply and explore this pathway deeply, you realize that, even when faced with imminent threats, we don't have to necessarily suffer.
이건 동물보다 더 나은 수준이에요.
And we can actually become better than animals.
그래서 제가 비교해서 말하는 거예요. 동물보다 우리는 못한 수준이 있다. 괴로움이라는 측면에서.
That's why I use animals as a benchmark for comparison, saying that as we currently live, we are even lower in our ability to not to suffer.
그래서 적어도 동물 수준은 돼야 되지 않느냐.
So I say, we should live at least on par with animals.
이것은 정신적인 치료의 작용입니다.
And this is a sort of a pathway to healing of your mental functioning.
근데 동물보다 좀 나아야 되지 않느냐.
But I say, as human beings, shouldn't we be better than animals?
이것은 우리가 개발해야 될 부분입니다.
And this is the area that we need to explore.
그래서 주로 치료라는 것은 이 트라우마라든지 이런 우리의 괴로움을 이렇게 해소하는 거고요.
So a treatment or healing, is a matter of relieving ourselves from the hurts of the traumas.
또 어떤 상황이 미래에도 어떤 상황이 닥치더라도 괴로움이 생겨나지 않도록, 그러니까 생겨난 괴로움을 치료하고 생겨나지 않는 괴로움이 앞으로 생겨나지 않도록 하는 것이 수행이라는 거예요.
And practice is all about, relieving ourselves of this existing suffering and also kind of training ourselves with the resiliency so that new sufferings in the future does not affect us.
육체로 생각하면 이미 고장난 것은 치료해서 고치고 고장나지 않도록 더욱더 건강해지는 삶이라는 거죠.
You know, with the analogy, the physical body, fix what's ailing you, and then become healthier, so that you're not as susceptible to future diseases.
여기 썼던 뭐 건강이라는 것이 파워를 말하는 게 아니에요.
So when I say health, I don't really mean strength or power.
Yeah, thank you, Sunim. I think your explanation is really valuable. I think part of the reason why I ask this question is because throughout my life, I've had a lot of conversations with people who view nature in a fundamentally different way. They think that I was also one of these people as well before I met Jungto Society. And I think there are a lot of people who view that being better than nature, being better than squirrels, means that we have power over them. And I think that's such a fundamental difference in the worldview that it's hard to talk with these people. And I think part of those, a lot of people may not necessarily have that exact thought. But that kind of worldview just leaks to different people, even though they may not hold, a lot of value in having power over nature. And I think when people, like, for example, my wife asks the question, hey, how do we know that squirrels live better lives than we do? I think I really wanted to ask you that question and hear from you that just exactly what we value as Buddhists. And I think my question's been fully answered. Thank you.
이 세상의 모든 것들을 다 하나님이 움직인다 이렇게 믿는 사람도 있잖아요.
There are those people who believe in the prime mover, right? God moves everything.
그런 사람하고 어떻게 같이 살아요?
Then how do you live with a person like that?
그러니까 믿음은 서로 다른 거예요.
So everybody has different beliefs.
또 세계관도 다르고
We all have different worldviews.
또 자연관도 다르고
We have different ways of looking at nature.
그러면 이 다르다는 게 뭘까요?
Then what is the nature of these differences?
다른 세계에 산다는 게 아니라 생각이 다르다는 거예요.
It doesn't mean we live in different physical worlds. It's that our mental worlds are different.
그것은 정신작용입니다.
It is a mental function. It's a cognitive function.
그래서 우리가 이 같은 세계에 살아도 다양한 정신 차원을 갖고 있기 때문에 어쩌면 우리가 다른 세계에 산다고 할 만큼 서로 다른 곳에서 다른 관점을 갖고 살아가고 있습니다.
We might live in the same physical world, but we live in our own individual, separate mental world. Some of us are so different, from a mental world perspective, it's almost akin to living in totally different physical world.
이것이 그 중에 어떤 것이 옳으냐는 관점에 서지 말고 다르다고 그냥 인정하고 이해하는 겁니다.
And instead of trying to evaluate these differences as being good or bad, just see them as differences.
그들은 대부분 정신작용 그 하나만 갖고 생각합니다.
Because we all think usually within the scope of our own mental functioning.
그러나 그 정신작용은 생명작용에 바탕하고 있다 하는 것을 그들은 잘 모르는 거예요.
And people don't realize that their own mental functioning is based on the life functioning they live on.
이런 수많은 생명작용은 다 물질작용의 바탕에 두고 있습니다.
And the life functions that we depend on depend on the underlying the material functions.
그러나 그것은 또 다른 차원을 갖고 있습니다.
But at different levels.
이것을 종합적으로 이해하는 게 필요합니다.
So it's important for us to have a comprehensive understanding.
내가 이것을 종합적으로 이해하는 게 중요하지 다른 사람이 종합적으로 이해하지 못하는 것을 탓할 필요는 없습니다.
So it's important for me to have this integrated, comprehensive understanding.
어떤 사람이 쥐를 신으로 믿고 뱀을 신으로 믿는다고 해서 비난할 필요는 없습니다.
You don't have to criticize others who believe that rats are gods or snakes are gods.
그들은 저것을 믿고 있구나 이렇게 그냥 받아들이면 됩니다.
Just acknowledge and validate that they have a right to that belief.
그래야 이 평화가 옵니다.
Only then can you achieve peace.
저는 인도의 불가촉 천민들은 힌두교입니다. 종교로 말하면. 그리고 로힝야는 무슬림이고요. 그리고 미나라오에 있는 이 원주민들은 그냥 자연신을 믿는 사람들입니다.
So the untouchables that I help in India, they're Hindu, and the Rohingya refugees, they're Muslims, and the people we help in the indigenous people of Mindanao in the Philippines, they're pagan,
그들의 믿음을 그냥 존중하는 거예요.
and we just respect their respective beliefs.
존중한다는 말은 인정한다는 거예요.
Respecting means acknowledging.
어떤 사람은 내가 어떤 물건을 줘도 하나님이 주셨다 이렇게 말하지 않습니까?
Some people, when you give them a gift, they thank God.
내가 밥을 해줬는데도 하나님께서 이 음식을 주셨다 이렇게 기도합니다.
You make a meal for them, and they thank God for that meal.
그걸 뭐 나쁘게 생각할 게 뭐 있어요?
There's nothing wrong with that.
내가 하나님이 되잖아요, 그러면.
Then you become God.
그냥 이해하고 받아들이는 겁니다.
It's just a matter of acknowledging and understanding.
부인을 어떤 달리 이해시키지 말고 그냥 부인을 관점을 이해하고 또 그가 어떤 변화가 올 때까지 기다려주고 이런 게 필요합니다.
So instead of trying to convince your wife of your understanding of how things work, maybe wait for her to come to that understanding by herself.
우리가 괴로워한다면 다람쥐보다 못하지 않느냐 이렇게는 말할 수 있지만 다람쥐가 우리보다 더 행복하다 이렇게 말하면 맞지 않습니다.
So if we suffer, we can say that, we're not living our life as well as a squirrel. But at the same time, conversely, we cannot say that squirrels are living a more joyful life than us.
이렇게 말하면 이제 오해가 생기는 거예요.
Then that causes misunderstanding.
Understood, Sunim. Thank you.
네. 잠깐 소감 듣겠습니다.
Let's go back to the questioners to get a little comments from them.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun asking my question and listening to your answer. I think all the more because I wasn't expecting to actually ask. I was told that I won't have the chance today, but when you called on my name, it caught me off. And I think I was actually able to, in a way, ask my question in a more fluid manner, like in a regular conversation, rather than I'm just, instead of reading off like what I actually wrote down or submitted. So I'm glad I was able to ask and have a real conversation, and I'm pretty happy with what I heard. Thank you.